Simone
Okay,
had a
let's review
system,
this
not the
chapter.
kind you write
The
down
main
or
idea
explain
is
to
about
anyone,
sustainable
the kind you
growth.
build
I'll
quietly,
make a note of that.
over years, out
Yes,
of
that
pure
makes sense
necessity.
now.
Wake at 5:45. Coffee before anything else. 20 minutes of silence before her daughter Maya woke up, because those 20 minutes were the only ones in the day that belonged entirely to her. Maya was 7 now. Bright and particular, with strong opinions about breakfast and an attachment to a stuffed rabbit named Clover that had been washed so many times its color had softened to something between gray and beige. Simone loved her with the specific, total love of a woman who had
Oh my
reorganized her
God.
entire
I
existence
can't
around one
believe
small
this.
person and found it
Hello,
was
are you
not a
there?
sacrifice,
This is
it was
serious. I
just
need
her
to know what
life now.
happened.
But
Please
love
call me
didn't pay
back.
the electricity bill 2 weeks late. Love didn't cover the gap between what her part-time position at the community health center paid and what it cost to exist in a city that had quietly tripled its rent expectations while she wasn't looking. She was good at managing. She had always been good at managing. What she was less good at, what she had never quite mastered, despite years of trying, was asking for help. She had been raised to handle her own weight. She still believed in that. But some weights were not designed to be carried by one person. The situation with the child care center had started 3 months
I
ago.
can't
The
believe
center
this.
Maya attended after
How could you
school,
do
the
this to
one 2
me?
blocks from
It
Simone's
hurts so
office, the
much.
one Maya had been attending since
Why?
she was 4, had sent a letter in January. Rate increase. Effective spring. The new rate was $40 a week more than the old one. $40 was not a catastrophic number in the abstract. In Simone's budget, it was a hole she could not patch without removing something else. She had gone through the numbers the way she always did, carefully, honestly, without rounding in her favor. She cut the streaming subscriptions she rarely had time to use. She switched grocery stores. She found $12 in small adjustments that she was proud of for exactly one day, before doing the math again and seeing that 28 remained. She applied for a subsidy. The form was long, the wait was longer, and the woman on the phone had told her gently that the current waitlist was running 4 to 6 months. Maya's fees were due now, not in 4 to 6 months. Simone sat with this for 2 weeks. She called her older sister, who had her own situation and couldn't. She called a friend who offered with too much hesitation for Simone to accept. She ran out of people before she ran out of problem. And then she thought of Daniel. She hadn't let herself think about him in a long time. Not because it was painful, or not only because of that, but because thinking about Daniel had a way of pulling at something she had worked hard to keep still. They had been together for 2 years, 4 years ago. It had ended without cruelty, which had somehow made it harder to be angry about. He had wanted different things at a different pace, and she had needed more than he was offering. And eventually, the space between those two facts had become too wide to stand in. He wasn't a bad man. She had never been able to call him that. He was someone who had been decent to her in the ways he knew how, and insufficient in the ways she hadn't understood until it was too late to renegotiate. She had kept his number. She hadn't analyzed why. It had simply stayed in her phone the way some things stay, evidence of something that existed. She wasn't going to call him for money. She was clear about that with herself, but he had once offered, unprompted, early in their relationship, that if she ever needed something practical, she should ask him directly and not make it complicated. She had never asked. She wasn't sure that offer still stood after 4 years of silence. But she was also 34 years old with $28 she couldn't find, and the offer had been made. She typed it on a Tuesday evening after Maya was in bed. She had already written and deleted 2 versions, one too long, one that explained too much, one that sounded like an apology for existing. The final version was short. She read it 3 times before sending. Hi. I know it's been a while. I'm in a difficult spot. Childcare costs went up and I'm a bit short this month. I'm not asking for much, and I'll pay it back. If it's not possible, I completely understand. Sorry for reaching out like this. She pressed send before the apologetic part of her brain could compose a 4th version. Then she set the phone on the counter, face down, and washed the dishes. She finished the dishes. She folded the laundry she'd left on the couch. She checked on Maya, deeply asleep, Clover tucked under one arm. She came back to the kitchen. She turned the phone over. No reply. The message showed as delivered. She told herself that was fine. People didn't always respond immediately, especially to an unexpected message from someone they hadn't spoken to in 4 years. She made herself a cup of tea. She drank half of it. She went to bed and lay in the dark for an hour, listening to the building settle before she finally slept. Wednesday came and went. The message sat there, delivered, unread, quiet as a thing that has been placed somewhere and left. She checked it twice in the morning, told herself to stop, checked it once more at lunch, and then put her phone in her bag and tried to leave it there. By Wednesday evening, she had accepted that he might not respond. He had a new life. She didn't know the details, but 4 years was time enough for a life to fully reorganize itself. Maybe the number was old. Maybe he had seen it and didn't know how to respond to something so distant and unexpected. Maybe he had simply decided not to. She wasn't angry. She had sent it with held expectations, and held expectations were easier to recover from than open ones. But on Thursday morning, when she checked again and found the same delivered but unread status, something shifted. Not into anger, into decision. She was a woman who moved forward when waiting stopped working. She had done it after he'd left, after the childcare situation started, after every point in her life when remaining still had started to cost more than moving. She looked at Maya eating cereal across the breakfast table, focused, serious, discussing something with Clover in a low voice, and felt the ordinary weight of loving someone who depended entirely on her. She would go. Not to confront. Just to know. She arranged for her neighbor Mrs. Adeyemi to take Maya after school on Friday. Mrs. Adeyemi was 71, sharp, and had an uncomplicated love for Maya that made arrangements between them easy. She asked no questions except whether Maya needed dinner, and Simone said yes, and that was that. Friday morning, Simone dressed with the specific care she applied to things that mattered, not to impress, but to feel equipped. The gray blazer she reserved for appointments. Her good boots. She looked in the mirror long enough to confirm she looked like herself rather than someone who had stayed up worrying, and then she left before she could reconsider. Daniel's address she had never deleted either. It had lived in her phone alongside his number, both kept, both unused, both quiet. She looked at it on the train and thought about the last time she had stood at his door. 4 years ago, toward the end, when the conversations had started to feel like negotiations, neither of them was winning. She had stood in the same spot and tried to find a version of that relationship that still made sense. She hadn't found one. She hoped today would be simpler than that. She needed it to be simple. A brief conversation, a yes or no, and then a clear path forward. She got off at his stop and walked the 2 blocks she remembered. The street was quieter than she remembered. More trees, the kind that took years to grow into themselves, which meant she had simply not noticed them when she was last here. His building was a narrow townhouse on a residential block, red brick, window boxes, the kind of house that looked like someone had taken deliberate care of it over time. She had always liked it. She stood on the pavement for a moment, gathering nothing in particular, just standing, the way you stand before something that has a before and after quality about it. She walked up the 3 front steps. She rang the bell. She heard nothing immediately. Then, faint but distinct, small footsteps. The irregular, unhurried sound of someone small moving through an interior without urgency. She registered the footsteps before she registered what they meant, and by the time they reached the door and she understood, it was too late to prepare. The door opened. A child stood in the frame. A girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, in a yellow dress with small white flowers, her hair in 2 flat twists with yellow beads at the ends. She looked up at Simone with the completely direct, unguarded gaze of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't evaluating you.
I'm ready.
Hello, the girl said.
Stay close.
Simone's mouth opened,
I will.
then closed.
Let's move.
The girl waited, entirely patient, one hand resting on the doorframe in no hurry. Simone had built a version of this moment during the train ride over. Daniel at the door, the initial surprise on both sides, a brief recovery, the conversation beginning. She had not built any version of this. Hi, she managed. Her voice came out at a register she didn't intend, softer, smaller. The girl tilted her head slightly. Are you looking for someone? Simone paused. Is Daniel here? Daniel Ashworth? The girl's expression shifted. Not alarm, just a new piece of information being filed. He's my daddy, she said, simply. Matter-of-factly. The way children say things that flatten adults. Simone absorbed this. She made her face stay level by concentrating on the mechanics of it. Chin steady, eyes forward, the deliberate neutral she used in rooms where falling apart wasn't an option. Is he home? She asked. The girl shook her head. He went to the market. Granny's in the back. She stepped aside from the door. A gesture so natural and trusting that Simone felt something in her chest ache softly at it. You can wait if you want, the girl said. Simone looked at this child. This small, yellow-dressed, unhesitating child who had just opened a door that changed the shape of the afternoon. She stepped inside because stepping away felt wrong in a way she couldn't fully justify. The hallway was warm, familiar in its layout. She had been here enough times to know where the coats hung, where the floor had the slight dip near the bathroom door. But it was different now in the way a space becomes different when a child has moved into it. Small shoes beside the door. A drawing pinned to the corkboard above the console table. A house, a sun, 2 figures. A small pink umbrella propped against the wall. She stood in the hallway and breathed carefully. The girl had moved a few steps ahead and now turned back to look at her. Checking, Simone realized whether she was following. I'm Simone, Simone offered. The girl considered this. I'm Adais, she said. But Daddy calls me Ada. That's a beautiful name. Ada accepted this with a small nod, not flattered, just receiving information. She moved toward the kitchen and Simone followed, because following felt like the only sensible thing. The kitchen was the same in its bones, same layout, same window over the sink, but different in the details. A child's step stool at the counter. Drawings on the fridge. A small pot of crayons on the kitchen table beside a half-finished coloring page. Ada climbed onto a chair and looked at Simone from across the table. Waiting. At ease. Not confused at all by the situation. Ada was not a nervous child. That was what struck Simone most, sitting across the kitchen table from her, while the sound of someone moving in the back garden filtered softly through the closed back door. Most children this age, encountering a stranger in their home, would fill the silence with noise. Questions, observations, the restless movement of someone uncertain. Ada sat with her hands loosely on the table and looked at Simone with the patient, attentive quality of a person who was comfortable with quiet and comfortable with observation. She wasn't unfriendly. She had let Simone in, offered her a seat without being asked, and introduced herself with the directness of a child who had been taught that her name was worth giving. But she also wasn't performing anything. She was simply present, taking things in, processing. Simone found herself studying the girl with the same careful attention. Ada was perhaps 6 or 7. She had her father's mouth. Simone recognized it in the particular shape of the upper lip, the way it sat at a slight natural upward curve that made neutral look almost like almost smiling. The eyes were different, wider set, darker. The coloring was different. But the mouth, and something in the way she held herself, the particular quality of her stillness, was so recognizably Daniel that Simone felt a sharp, small ache behind her sternum. How old are you? Simone asked. 6, Ada said. 7 in October. Simone nodded. The number settled quietly. She did the math without choosing to, the particular reflex of a mind trained to pay attention to timelines. 6, turning 7 in October, which meant she was born in late autumn. She would have been conceived. Simone pulled back from that calculation. She made herself stop. She was sitting in a man's kitchen she had not entered in 4 years, doing arithmetic about a child who was not hers and had no reason to mean anything beyond what she was, Daniel's daughter. She looked at Ada's hands on the table. Long fingers, nails clean and cut short, a small friendship bracelet on the left wrist, plastic beads pink and yellow alternating. Something about the hands made Simone look at her own for a moment, then away. Does your daddy know you let people in? She asked. Granny was home, Ada said, as if this answered the question, which in its own logic it did. And you seemed nice, she added. How could you tell? Ada considered this genuinely. You look nervous, she said. Mean people don't look nervous. Simone felt something loosen in her chest, small, unexpected. The specific release of being seen accurately by someone who had no reason to look that carefully. The back door opened and a woman stepped in from the garden. Tall, somewhere in her early 60s, with the particular bearing of someone who moved through the world expecting it to make room. She stopped when she saw Simone. Not with alarm, with the calibrated pause of someone cataloging information quickly. "Oh," the woman said. Her voice was measured. "Hello. I'm sorry to intrude," Simone said, standing from instinct. "Daniel wasn't. I was waiting. Ada let me in." The woman looked at Ada. Ada looked back with the composure of a person who did not feel she had done anything requiring defense. "I'm Gloria," the woman said. "Daniel's mother." Simone? Something, very brief, barely a flicker, moved across Gloria's face. Recognition, or something adjacent to it. It was there and gone before Simone could read it fully. "He shouldn't be long," Gloria said. She moved to the counter, filled the kettle. The kitchen held the careful quiet of a space where two people were being polite around something they weren't discussing. Ada had returned to her coloring page. The scratch of crayon on paper was the only real sound. "Tea?" Gloria asked without turning. "Please," Simone said. She sat back down. Gloria set the kettle on without further conversation. Simone looked at Ada's bent head, the careful way she stayed inside the lines, and felt the morning rearranging itself around her in ways she hadn't prepared for. "Does he know you were coming?" Gloria asked. She set a mug on the table, not where Ada sat, but where Simone could reach it. Still facing the counter. "No," Simone said. "I sent a message. He didn't reply." Gloria nodded once. Not apologetically, just acknowledging. "He's been busy." "I'm sure." A pause. The kettle clicked. Gloria poured. "Ada," she said, "why don't you take your coloring to the front room, sweetheart?" Ada looked up. She looked at Simone. Something passed in her expression, the specific reluctance of a child who would rather stay. But she gathered her things without argument and carried them out, her footsteps quiet down the hallway. The front room door clicked softly. Gloria brought her own mug to the table and sat. The two women looked at each other across the kitchen table. Two people with an amount of history neither had chosen, being careful. "How long has it been?" Gloria asked. 4 years, Gloria nodded. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "She looks like him," Simone said. She hadn't planned to say it. It simply surfaced. "Around the mouth." Gloria looked at her steadily. "She does," she said. Then, after a moment, "Ada doesn't know a great deal about the time before her." She said it carefully, deliberately. The words had shape, like something placed rather than dropped. Simone held her mug and waited. "Her mother left early on," Gloria said. She didn't elaborate on early. "Daniel has managed on his own. We help, I come when I can. But it's been mostly him and her." She paused. "She's been his whole world. Everything is built around her now." Simone nodded. She could see it. In the step stool at the counter, in the drawings covering the fridge, in the fact that Ada had opened the door to a stranger and felt safe enough to do so.
I'm scared.
Because this was a
I
home
know,
where she was so
sweetie. I'm
completely
here.
loved that
Don't
fear hadn't
leave
had
me.
much room to grow.
I promise I won't.
"She's remarkable," Simone said. "She is," Gloria agreed. The kettle had long since stopped. Outside, a car turned into the street. Simone heard it without processing it as relevant. Gloria heard it differently. Her eyes moved to the window, her hands settled around her mug. And Simone recognized the stillness of someone who had just heard something coming and was deciding how to be when it arrived. "That'll be him," Gloria said quietly. She looked at Simone, not unkindly, just directly, the way older women sometimes look at younger ones when they are handing them something they'll have to carry themselves. "Whatever this is," she said, "I hope it's worth the trip." The car door outside closed. Simone set her hands flat on the table. She breathed. She thought about the last real conversation they'd had. Not the last words, the last real one. It had been at his kitchen table, the same table, though it had looked different then. No crayons, no drawings, no small evidence of a life built around someone small. He had been honest with her that night. He had said, "I care about you. I just can't give you the thing you need me to give. And I don't know how to stop being what I am." She had heard that and known it was true, and loved him for the honesty and resented him for it at the same time. She had left that night and cried in her car for 11 minutes. She remembered the time because she had watched the clock, and then driven home and made herself tea and decided to be practical about it. She had been mostly practical since. She had built the system: 5:45, coffee, silence, Maya, work, childcare, repeat. She had not left much space for what could not be practical. Sitting in this kitchen now, with the ghost of that last conversation still in the walls and a child's crayon drawing bright against the fridge door, she understood something she had not been able to see from a distance. He had moved forward, differently from her, into a different version of the same terrain. But forward. The front door opened. She heard his key. Then the door. Then his voice, calling in the way of someone coming home to people they love. "Ada, Mum?" Ada's voice from the front room. "In here, Daddy? And there's a lady in the kitchen." A beat of silence, one heartbeat's worth. Then his footsteps, crossing the hallway, slowing at the kitchen door. He appeared in the frame. Daniel Ashworth, 4 years older, which meant something specific in a man's face. More settled, the softness that belonged to his 20s replaced by something quieter. He had a canvas shopping bag in one hand. He stood completely still. Simone, her name from his mouth. She had imagined this moment on the train and not gotten close. "Hi, Daniel." He looked at his mother. Gloria looked back with the calm of someone who had done her part and was leaving the rest to them. She stood, picked up her mug, and said, "I'll take this outside." She moved past Daniel with a brief hand on his arm. Light, steadying, the specific touch of
I
a
was
parent
hoping to
who
see
has
you
nothing
here.
left to say but wants
You
to
have
say
a way
something.
of finding me.
The back door opened
A
and
toast
closed.
to unexpected
They were alone in the
encounters.
kitchen.
and to
Daniel
where they
set
might
the
lead.
shopping bag on the counter. He looked at Simone across the small, ordinary space. And 4 years of silence did what silences do when two people finally stand in the same room with nowhere else to be. It became briefly enormous and then began slowly to settle. He sat down, not across from her. At the end of the table, the third position, leaving the geometry of the space open rather than confrontational. She recognized that about him. He had always been careful about how he placed himself in a room, about not using space as a statement. "I saw the message," he said. "I was going to call today. I didn't want to wait." "I know." He looked at the table. "I'm sorry I didn't reply sooner." "It's fine," she said. Then, "It wasn't fine, but it doesn't matter now." He looked up. Their eyes met. She had forgotten, or she had made herself forget, the specific quality of that. The way he looked at you, as though he was fully present, fully there. It had been one of the things she had loved most about him and had missed in a way she hadn't let herself name. He said, "You met Ada?" "Yes, she let you in," without hesitation. Something moved across his face. Soft, private, pride, she thought, the kind that lives very deep. "She does that," he said. "She trusts people. She's wonderful," Simone said, and then, because it was sitting right at the surface and she was tired of managing everything carefully, "She looks like you, around the mouth." He held her gaze. "People say that," he said. Something in his voice had changed. Lower, more careful. She watched his face. She had always been good at reading him. It was one of the things he had found both comforting and occasionally unsettling when they were together. She was reading him now. He was looking at his hands on the table, processing something, assembling pieces. She had the strange sensation of watching someone arrive at a conclusion she had reached herself 20 minutes earlier in the same kitchen, moving through the same stations, gathering the same evidence, approaching the same edge. "How old is Maya?" he asked. The question was quiet, careful, placed gently, the way you place something fragile. Her breath paused. 7, she said. His eyes came up. "Born in March," she said. 4 years ago. The kitchen held the sentence. He looked at her fully. She looked back. She was not accusing. She was not certain. She had not let herself be certain, had not let the math complete itself into a conclusion, had kept it at the level of observation, and refused to push it further. But it was there between them now, the shape of it, the question, too visible for either of them to look around. "Simone," he said. His voice was very low. "I need to ask you something." "I know," she said. Her own voice
Don't
was
worry.
steady.
Everything will be
She had
fine.
not known when she
Are you
sent that
sure,
message
Dad?
4 days ago that it
We're
would
here
lead
together.
here.
We'll face it.
She had known so little.
Exactly. As
"Ask,"
a family.
she said. He asked. She answered. They talked for a long time, longer than either had planned, longer than the afternoon light through the kitchen window, which moved from gold to gray while they sat at the table and said the things that had been waiting unsaid for 4 years. She told him about Maya's birth, the timing, the circumstances, the decision she had made to raise her without reaching out to someone she wasn't sure wanted to be reached. He told her about Ada, the relationship that had existed briefly and in parallel, the pregnancy he hadn't known about until it was undeniable, the woman who had left and the child who had stayed. They compared dates, they compared details. They sat with the possibility that became, in the sitting, something close to certainty. Ada appeared in the doorway at one point. Yellow dress, curious eyes, Clover replaced by a small, soft dog she had evidently retrieved from the front room. She looked at her father. She looked at Simone. "Are you still here?" she asked Simone. "Yes," Simone said. Ada nodded, satisfied. She disappeared again. Daniel watched the empty doorway after she left. Simone watched him watching it. "She needs to know," he said eventually. His voice was barely above quiet. "So does Maya," Simone said. They looked at each other across the table. Not with all the answers, not with the clean resolution of a story that knows where it is going. Just with the particular honesty of two people who had finally stopped managing the distance between them. She left at 8. Ada was asleep. Gloria had said a quiet goodnight and given Simone a look that said, without words, with all the economy of a woman who had been watching people manage difficult things for a long time, that she had seen this coming in some form and was not opposed to wherever it led. Daniel walked Simone to the door. They stood on the front step in the evening. The street quiet, the trees holding their own dark shapes against the sky.
What should I write,
"I'll call
Daddy?"
you tomorrow," he said.
Whatever comes
"To
from your
talk about
heart,
how we do
sweetheart.
this."
Okay.
"Yes,"
I'll
she
write
said.
I love you.
There was a pause, not empty. The kind full of things being considered. "I'm glad you came," he said. She looked at him. "I almost didn't." "I know." He held her gaze. "I'm still glad." She walked to the end of the path and turned once. He was still in the doorway, backlit, arms loose at his sides, the house behind him full of drawings and small shoes and a child asleep with a soft dog tucked under her arm. She raised her hand briefly. He did the same. She turned and walked toward the station, into the evening air, carrying something she had not brought with her when she came. Not resolution. She was clear-eyed enough to know that what came next would be complicated and slow and require more from both of them than a single afternoon could promise. But underneath the complicated, underneath the questions still forming, something true had surfaced. And truth, she had always believed, was the only place anything real could begin.